Hi guys, Will Holland here from Invisible Country, and welcome to my first field report. Field reports are just going to be weekly quick dives into things that I find interesting going on in UAP and phenomenon news. So this week I want to focus on two things. Representative Eric Burlison from Congress and his request for evidence on a 1952 UFO event over Washington, D.C. Let's get into it. Let's start with Burlison. So he's a congressman out of Missouri. He started getting on these congressional hearings in like 2023 when you saw whistleblowers like David Grush come forward. Grush is the guy that comes out of the intelligence communities, whistleblew, and said he knew where crafts are. He can give the addresses to congressmen. He also said the word biologics, kind of introducing the idea that we may have alien bodies as well. Super intense stuff. You know, Burlison, from there, he goes through a couple of different eras that I want to break down with his relationship to disclosure. So from here, let's go into Eric Burlison's SCIF era. If you're wondering what SCIF is, it stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. Think about it like these secret little pods that congressmen can go into. They can see crazy videos, they can get top secret information, they can talk to whistleblowers really securely, right? So Burlison starts going into these SCIFs with a couple other people like Rep. Luna and Tim Burchett from Tennessee, and they start receiving a lot of information, a lot of intelligence, a lot of actual documentation and videos that kind of open up their whole world. You see Burlison pop out in January of this year, 2026, at a press conference presenting the UAP Disclosure Act. He was really kind of heading that whole thing up, saying we got to have more transparency in this situation, we got to have a process of review, and we got to protect these whistleblowers. In fact, it led to this comment at the press conference I want you to hear now.
If there's any government that's holding information about the knowledge of whether or not we are alone or not alone in the universe, that is not for any government, no matter how powerful it is, to withhold from the rest of humanity.
From there, Burlison leaves the SCIF. He starts going on podcasts and talking about some things that he's been seeing here in those secret compartments. Which is good. That's what we want. That's part of disclosure. But at the same time, any form of disclosure brings messiness because it includes people. So that's why I call this the Burlison Messy Era. Burlison starts talking on podcasts about really simple things at first, like different propulsion systems, things they're seeing in these videos that are moving outside our side of physics. Pretty cool, actually. From there, he even talks about how the intelligence communities are starting to take this more seriously because of a fever pitch of the amount of incursions that are happening over military bases in 2026 of UAP, which is kind of a crazy thing to hear. From there, this messy era kind of gets messy. He talks to this group of Christian pastors for some reason, and they start coming forward saying, we talked to a congressman and he told us that aliens seeded our race and that's demonic. Which Burlison had to come back and be like, I didn't say that. He even talked about summoning events, that he read a brief that perhaps there were these teams like Skywatcher and Jake Barber who knew how to summon UAP onto test ranges to show members of the intelligence community. He said he wasn't a part of those events, but also very interesting. He even mentioned that he's trying to get to a secret UFO out of our country, a lot of people say South Korea, that is so big that it couldn't be moved, and they built a facility on top of it, and he's trying to get access to that. All super interesting. Then he went on Jeremy Corbell and Weaponized, and he started talking about how he had actually gotten access to an underground military base. Corbell and George Knapp responded that they knew about $10 million going to said base, in which Burlison replied, I think the doors that I walked through on this facility cost $10 million, which is a really interesting insight. And then beyond that, he didn't want to say which military site he went to, in which George Knapp actually revealed it was Pax River. And you can hear that here.
You recently took a field trip to Pax River. Can you tell us what your expectations were going in, and then can you describe the trip and what you saw?
Guys, I I can't really, I have not publicly said that I've taken the trip to Pax River.
You know, moving out of that interview, you suddenly see Rep. Burlison start to get a little more centered in who he's wanting to talk to and what type of files he's going after, which now brings us to the GERB era. When you hear GERB, I'm referring to a podcaster and legacy program researcher who goes by UAP GERB. He doesn't like using his real name. And if you dig into him any amount at all, you'll see that he's an expert, dangerously so, at breaking apart the legacy program and showing us the layers within. Very simply, he says that the Department of Defense and the intelligence communities break down to their own branches. Underneath that are FFRDCs, and then down to private contractors. So you can see GERB and Burlison working together to make a plan on how to get actual disclosure out of the legacy program. The first step you see Burlison do is he really pinpoints these missing scientists, nuclear scientists, even this General McCaslin, who Burlison at some point calls General UAP. He also starts fighting for whistleblower protection, calling that out on his X, you can see right here. And then when asked about the intelligence communities, here's a nice little clip when it comes to his thoughts on how to get information out of them.
From my experience, we're going to have to wrestle the intelligence community to the ground in order to get this information out of their hands, because they really do everything they can to try to block us in our efforts.
So this brings us to April 2026. And I called this the Rep. Burlison Letters Era. This is when Burlison starts requesting investigations for these missing scientists. He actually calls out the FBI, he asks the Pentagon, the Department of Energy, and even weirdly NASA to start investigations into these disappearances and quote-unquote supposed murders. Beyond that, he starts to focus on FFRDCs, and FFRDC is a federally funded research and development center. And think about those in the legacy program as these entities like MITRE or the RAND Corporation that the US government and private contractors like Lockheed Martin have a buffer entity. And that's where a lot of these reverse engineering programs, these biologics could be held. So, in the letters era, Burlison starts going after these FFRDCs. You can see him writing letters to MITRE requesting information. You can even see him sending memes, popular memes, to private entities like Northrop Grumman. Really interesting time for meme culture and disclosure. And this brings us to currently, where Representative Burlison is reaching out to the MIT Lincoln Labs, and he's requesting a very specific form of evidence about the 1952 UFO incursion over Washington, D.C. The 52 D.C. flap, it's one of my favorites to hear about. So in July, it was at night, an air traffic controller saw 6 UAP on the radar in the area, saying that they moved like radically. He ended up calling the local Air Force Base, I believe it was Andrews Air Force Base, to report the sightings. And at the same time on base, they were witnessing giant orange orbs. They sent out 2 fighter pilots that night, not to discover anything at all. And then about a week later, the exact same thing started happening. Fighter chases, which led to this big national headline. Why I find this so interesting, for Representative Burlison to be calling out an FFRDC for a very specific reel-to-reel audio evidence of a UFO incursion over DC in 1952, I think that's showing where disclosure is headed and how we're actually going to break some information open. As opposed to us going to like, hey, war.gov, drop any files that you possibly can. We want the truth. That gives them the control in what they want to show us, how they want to show it to us, and when they want to. When you have a congressman who's working with someone like David Grush, who's like an intelligence community insider turned whistleblower, and then UAP GERB, who's like a legacy program researcher. Stay safe out there, GERB. I worry about you. What that empowers him to do is to reach out to specific entities deep in the layer and silos of the legacy program and request extremely specific documentation, even down to the file name, to bring out and show to the public. And I think that's just a really smart and realistic way to start really opening up information in the disclosure space. And that's why I wanted to share it today. So, yeah, that's all I got today for our field reports. Thanks for sticking with me this whole time. Stay open. Look up.